we're gonna discuss getting rid of, the water. I'm not gonna read all their bios all at once because we'll get confused, but I'm gonna, from my mind, I'm gonna start off with Jill. And then I'm gonna move to Alexis, who's gonna talk about community, and then I'm gonna finally talk to Greg, who's gonna talk about funding, so it can make it a lot simpler. So I'm gonna introduce Jill first, and then I'm gonna have Jill talk about her outreach with Freshwater Future. And then after that, then I'm gonna introduce Alexis and then Greg. Okay, so Jill, special friend. It's like, I hate to read bios because it's just like, it's so technical. Like, yeah, you know, she went to the university, she has a law degree, she works in a nonprofit. But she's like a special friend that I've known for like over 10 years. When I was in Detroit doing work with a community organization, the West Grand Boulevard Collective. And then the work that I did with the Sierra Club, that's how I was introduced to Freshwater Future. Then when I moved to Chicago, I got my first grant with them to do advocacy work. And Jill has been super helpful in terms of giving me information in terms of how to run my nonprofit, but also making connections for me in Chicago, but also inviting me to wonderful events like this, so I can get a better understanding of what I need to do with the work that I'm doing in Chicago. And one of the things that she's been super helpful with is giving me outreach information, because my goal is to reach the community that has the least voice. And that tends to be the poor people in our community who don't know about a lot of these programs because they don't have social media. They don't have emails, you know what I'm saying? So they simply don't know. And then when I started my work in Chicago doing affordable water, Chicago had a lot of money to give out, but they weren't reaching the community because they didn't tap into the community. Most of their work was done through social media. And I took a position at a pantry where I was able to work with the community and get people who were semi-illiterate, but didn't have emails. But when I came with them, I was able to put them into the program. Their water wasn't cut off, and I worked with about 50 to 60 people, and we saved over $100,000 in terms of their water bills in order to get them to the next step and get them on an affordability program. But that work wouldn't have existed if I wasn't working with Freshwater Future through Jill and Alexis. So I'm gonna start off with Jill. Jill's gonna talk about outreach, and then we'll move over to Alexis. Okay, Jill?
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much. Jeff is so modest. He's a great friend, that is true. It's a pleasure to work with Jeff. But Jeff and Freshwater Future and many other groups have been working on this lead issue. And a lot of that work, certainly not all, but a lot of it was started with the Flint water crisis. And that Flint water crisis allowed Freshwater Future to understand what the real problems are underlying our understanding of how safe our water is. And we went into Flint and listened for a year before we decided, is there something we can do to help? Because we are always from somewhere else. Even if we live there, Freshwater Future isn't the local on the ground group. So we were really fortunate to have lots of good groups and connections and individuals in Flint that we met and learned from. And coming out of that process, we learned that we could do a few things maybe to help as the city moved beyond this crisis. And one of those things was, we heard time and time again, we know this is true, it's not just in Flint, it's in Benton Harbor, and it's in other places. Once you go through that trauma of finding out that your water is not safe to drink from lead or something else, you don't want to drink it anymore. So even if lots of things happen to move that along, and the water may now still be safe, how do you actually get people to now know that? Because they thought it was safe with what you were doing before. So that's where we tried to help, and we worked with amazing people at the Flint Development Center, Mike Harris, some of you know Mike. And we had this idea about creating a lab where Flint residents could analyze water for other Flint residents and give them that information. But we learned from the elders, you can't do that. You have to have youth do that.
Right.
You have to listen, work with the youth, have them do the analysis, have them do the outreach. And that was great wisdom. We know that. So the lab exists. It took a few years to raise the money and build up the lab, but it's called the Flint Community Water Lab now. It's an amazing place. Residents of Flint can have their water tested for free anytime they want. And they can come and see that water move through the process if they want to. And they can talk to the youth and the chemists. And the chemists will go out into the community and talk to people about what they found when they tested their water. That outreach piece is more than just the city putting out information. That's what it's about the community taking their trusted entities like a Flint Development Center and a Flint Community Lab once it existed, and using those venues to move out and talk to people. Now, I'm not going to tell you that everybody is drinking the water freely. That's not happened yet. But people are understanding much more about how the water system works. Whether they might have lead pipes in their house still and how that has an impact, whether a filter can help. The lab also helps people get and install and maintain filters so that they can have safe water. Those are the types of things around lead that have to be done in partnership with community. And we know that in Benton Harbor as well. Here's Reverend. I see you way back there. Hi, Reverend. Reverend Pinckney called me when we were still working to get the Flint lab. Got a call from Reverend Pinckney in Benton Harbor. He said, Jill, something is wrong with the water. Something is wrong with the water. I don't know what. And so we were working with the University of Michigan lab at that point, and we said, well, let's test it. So we tested it, and it was high in lead. It was very high. People know. We intrinsically know some of these things. There was no, at that point, it hadn't come out that there was a problem. Reverend Pinckney went out and gathered samples, and we had them analyzed, and then later the state confirmed their numbers were the same as ours. There was a problem. The city was out of compliance, and the city of Benton Harbor now has come through that, in that all of the lead pipes have been changed. That's true for Flint mostly too. What people don't recognize is when we say all the pipes, what we mean is basically single residential homes. We don't mean businesses, we don't mean apartment complexes, we don't mean schools, right? We mean single family residential homes usually. So there's so much work still to do, even after you take all the lead pipes out, to figure out, are there any other problems? Are people ever going to trust this, and how can we help them? Because what we hear from people is, I'm going to get my water from bottles. And I understand that. If you don't trust it, you have to do something you find is more trustable. But that is a harm in itself. Aside from microplastics being in that bottle, and aside from the health impacts that you could get from that bottle, there's also the fact if you are having to pour bottles of water for your pasta dish, if you're having to wash dishes with bottles of water, it's a harm. And so that's why we have to move forward the outreach. We have to help communities move quickly when they find they have an issue with lead or another contaminant, so that we don't go down this road so far of, I don't trust the water. So all of that is to say, Freshwater Future is very concerned about that. We work on it a lot. We do have, and you might pick them out at the registration table. We have a few toolkits on lead because we want you to be able to use these. So right now they have our logo on them. We'll take that off and put your logo on and let you use them. That's the goal of stuff like this for us. outreach is really critical, because what we also know is when you have high lead, higher than the government says is acceptable. They call that an ALE, an action level exceedance. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean now it's unhealthy, but it was healthy before. It's not a health-based standard. Leave it there for now. But once you have that, then the city has to provide you with some education as a residential water customer. Unfortunately, they're not very good at it. So if you're having an ALD, and I know there are some of those around the state of New York, for example, it's really important to help community get some of these materials so that they know, okay, we have this problem right now. I should flush my water before I use it if it's been sitting for a few hours. I should filter it, only use cold water for filtering, and I should make sure that I'm maintaining that filter and using it for anything I think is important. That's the other thing. We often hear from governments that you just need it for X or Y, or, well, if you're not comfortable with it, you need it for whatever. So those filters are really important, but they're also really susceptible to mistakes. So if you have a filter on your faucet and you put hot water through it, it's not going to work very long. Little things like that. So outreach is critical. We have a lot of materials like this that we want you to use. Let us know. We'll do the work of putting your logo on and getting it out so you can print it. But these are the types of things that on lead, at the very beginning, it's important for the community to hear about them. We also do Facebook ads for every community in the Great Lakes that has an action level exceedance. We do Facebook ads to that community to get this word out. So those are some of the things that we find important in terms of outreach initially and then outreach over time as well. So I'm going to move on and let these really smart guys.
Thank you, Jill. Yeah. The next speaker is gonna be, Greg Campbell Cohen. He's from the city of Troy. We know about Troy in brief knowledge. The city, that's why it's, Troy is, the managing officer at Timber, a public interest, organization, working for people in Troy, New York. Troy's gonna talk about like
Greg.
funding. I'm sorry.
Greg.
I'm sorry. Troy is the city. Greg is the person. I apologize, Greg. So Greg is gonna talk about the funding in terms of how his city got money to work with reducing lead in their city water system.
Send it to myself. I didn't like. It's right. Yeah. Well,
I guess my name is Greg Campbell Cohen, and I'm the managing officer at Timber, which is a public interest group for people in Troy, New York. We were founded in spring of 2022, and pretty quickly led service line replacement became our bread and butter issue. The story of like how organizing started in Troy around lead service line replacement is actually rooted in funding. So I'll give a little bit of that background and then get into the specifics of how funding has worked in Troy and how we've gotten to now $30 million of investment from what was an unspent $500,000 just 2 years. In November of 2022, 3 people sort of noticed facets of a problem that was not being talked about in Troy. That was Jonna Favreau, who's the mother of 2 children, both of whom were suffering from quite severe childhood lead poisoning. What she had found was a budget address from 2017 where the mayor at the time said that they had planned to replace lead service lines using a grant of about $560,000 from the New York State Department of Health. And nobody had really seen anything that happened on that, and she was just asking what's going on with that. Rob Hayes at Environmental Advocates New York at that time, thanks to some foils to Freedom of Information law requests to the state, also identified that Troy may have had a problem spending this money, and both he and I had also just seen the latest annual water quality report published by the city of Troy that showed us with a pretty extreme exceedance in lead. By 2023, to give you a sense of how extreme that exceedance is, the 90th percentile, which is how EPA judges these things, again, it's not health-based. In Troy, it's 35.4, which is more than double the EPA action level. The highest sample is 177 parts per billion in someone's house, which is more than 10 times. What is allowable. So with that, and I won't go through like every step of it, although there were some sort of inventive tactics on the organizing side that got us there in February 2023. We went public with this. We had our story together. We met with a lot of labor unions, a lot of regulators, a lot of residents, built a coalition that was as big as possible, meeting people where they were at. And by March of 2023, then Mayor Madden made a promise to replace 100% of the service lines of the city at no direct cost to the residents, which means funding is going to have to come from somewhere that isn't residents, which is a pretty big promise and first of its kind in New York State. The subsequent mayor, now Mayor Metelo, promised to do all of that in 4 years, which is not going to happen, but it was a nice thing for her to say. It did create a sense of urgency around this funding question of how are we going to pay for this? Because I don't think anyone knew it at the time. Part of Troy's lead problem, when we got into it, was sampling. They were not sampling appropriately. And so they did not even have 120 pipes that they knew about that were lead to sample appropriately. We now know that the city has at least 2,000 lead pipes and probably 4,000 to 6,000. And if it's $3,000 to $10,000 a pop for replacing a pipe, we're talking about tens of millions of dollars. You know, so it's quite a lot of money that we're talking about. And I guess I'll start with the organizing principles and get into funding. Does that work? So there's the granular problem of funding that there were a lot of opportunities that were well timed with the campaign, specifically the American Rescue Plan, gave us a lot of money that we could use however we'd like, which was part of the problem with lead service line replacement, is that there's a public side to the pipe, which is the water main to the curb stop, and there's the private side, which is the curb stop to the house. And in New York State and a lot of states around the country, this is at least perceived as a issue where you cannot put public investment into private property. And so that private side is, it cannot be addressed using public funds. That's not true, but it is at least a going concern for a lot of cities that we have to work around. And so ARPA, the American Rescue Plan, which gave millions of dollars to every city in the country, those funds were a lot more flexible. And so by leveraging those funds to focus on the private side, which is more restricted for funding, you can use other funds for the public side. You're basically doing a spreadsheet exercise and doubling your money, doubling how far you can go with it. And The other issue where organizing ties into lead service line replacement quite a lot is, at least in New York State and probably in a lot of other states, the bipartisan infrastructure law offers quite a lot of money for lead service line replacement. And the way that they do that, because the amount of money that's been allocated to the bipartisan infrastructure law for lead service line replacement is not enough to replace all of the pipes in the country. Each state has to rationalize how they're going to allocate that money in each round. And so they have to do that based on needs and level of preparation for each city. And the best tool for doing that is the city's lead service line inventory, so knowing how many lead pipes they have. And in Troy, again, we had no idea how many lead pipes there were. At the start of this, we were at a 0% inventory in March 2022. By the end of 2023, we were up to 50%. And a lot of that was done through voluntary reporting. And so once we're able to identify a lead pipe, we're then able to prove to the state that we need this money to replace the pipe. And that's how Troy caught up and really got ahead of a lot of other cities across the state for lead service line replacement. So this stuff is all kind of granular, and I'm happy to go into it with anyone who's interested, but I would love to dial it back to something that's a little bit more accessible for how we created the urgency around pursuing this funding. And a lot of we can say anything we want, but we're just people, and we're nerds, and we obviously do not represent everybody that the city has to deal with and the city has to make happy. But what we can do is meet people where they're at and focus on their interests and get them on our team, so that what's scary for mayors is when the president of the Teamsters is saying word for word the same thing as I am, or the president of the Building Trades Association, or the president of the NAACP chapter in the area. And so a lot of our emphasis for organizing was recognizing who our allies could be way outside of our sphere, getting them on board and making this financial incentive for lead service line replacement known to them. If you're the president of the Teamsters, you represent people who do gravel and paving. So that work is a lot of membership dues. If you're the president of LIUNA, or you're the laborers, you're going to be the people who are going in and replacing those pipes. That's a lot of new work for your membership. And so thinking about it like that, in like a little bit more of a crass way, that's not how that wasn't the moral incentive for the work, but it was the organizing incentive for creating that sort of financial pressure. I could go into this for a while, but I'll leave it there and happy to take any questions.
Our final speaker this morning is Alexis. We have a saying in Southern culture, she comes from good stuff. I met her mom in Chicago, Alicia, several years ago, about doing work in the Chicago area around lead service lines. And from there, her mom, who worked for Freshwater Future, and Alexis, who also works for Freshwater Future, I was introduced to, and she's become a great ally for my organization in terms of technical support, in terms of conversation around advocacy. So I'm like super happy to be in her presence, but I know she's happy to be here this morning. You know how you could just, most of us have degrees, you know what I'm saying? Even if she didn't have a degree, she would be super special. Because she's such a wonderful person. She went to University of Toledo, have a bioengineering degree, and she'll talk about that when she gets up. But one of the things that's amazing is when I was in Toledo for one of the convenings in Freshwater Future, her mom invited me to come visit the organization that her mom runs in Toledo, and it's an amazing organization. And of course, Alexis is a part of that. And she's going to talk about lead service and lead in our waters from a community-based organization, which is super important because I'm finding that a lot of work that I do in Chicago is centered around larger organizations that do big advocacy work in DC, but sometimes we have to do work at the local level. And what she does and her mom does in Toledo is amazing. So Alexis, can you go?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Delighted to talk about the work that we do in Toledo, but it's not in just Toledo, it's across the region, as I've had the pleasure of working with Reverend Pinckney and Benton Harbor, Mike and Candace and Flint, we the people of Detroit, in Detroit, and so our work is overreaching, but as far as Toledo goes, and I was running around, excuse me, earlier, because I'm going kind of off script what I was thinking I was gonna do. I was like, I don't need a presentation, I'm just gonna wing it, you know? And so this is me winging it. I have a video, hopefully that we'll be able to play at some point. I'll talk a little bit first. That shows what I'm gonna talk about, that community consent to get this work done. We talk about lead service line, there's a huge mandate, right, to get the lead out. But we often don't talk about the nuance in terms of how do we do that and how do we gain the trust of community and residents to just let the utilities in their house, right? They have to get in and you want full lead line replacement, right? And so we have the private side and we have the public side where they can get to the public side, no problem. But they have to go into folks' home to get to the private side. And so that requires some permission from the homeowner, we would hope. And so now we have to talk about relationships and that dynamic that already exists between residents and utilities, which is sometimes a contentious relationship. These are the same folks who are gonna cut your water off if you don't pay your bill. And a lot of times they have a perception that folks aren't paying their bills just because they don't want to. And we know that's not true. Some folks, as Reverend Randall would say out of Toledo, have to rob Peter to pay Paul, you know? So you got a super high gas bill or super high light bill, but you know you still have to have water running in your home. So you gotta make some tough decisions to make that happen. And so the utilities, realizing they had a uphill battle when it comes to getting into folks' home, reached out to Junction Coalition, which is the organization that Jeff was referencing. That's a neighborhood junction. Historically, was a Polish community that over the turn of the century became more minority occupied. It is a neighborhood that the students in that neighborhood, 96% of them receive free or reduced lunch, which speaks to the low socioeconomic demographic. There is just over, I want to say 8,000 homes in that area. And I want to say maybe 80%, and probably more now because they're demoing houses, are vacant or blighted homes. So you can kind of get a picture of the sort of neighborhood that I live in. I live and work in this neighborhood. I grew up there. I grew up in Detroit, but I was born in Toledo and I moved back to Toledo when I was 12. I'm living in a grandmother's house that has been in our home and our family since her great grandmother had it and bought it from a Polish family. And so years and generations of history in this community that has been overburdened with, you know, there's factories all around, so we're over polluted as well and exposed to that pollution. And so when we get back to lead service line replacement, we have to talk about how do we gain the trust of community to let them know that yes, we want to help you keep your family safe, keep them protected. And a lot of times that means having a trusted face at the door when the utilities show up. And so we did that. My mother was really adamant that you can't just go knocking on folks' doors. They think you're turning off their water. They don't know you're there to help. And so we would show up, myself, my mom, and our team, go door knocking, door to door, and we show up with Ed Moore, the water director, and myself, and I say, hey, Coach Hunt, we're here to test your pipes. Remember you said you wanted to get the lead out? And he said, oh, yeah, come on in. Versus having that trepidation that is this person here to do harm. So I'm gonna try to cue up this video now, and I'll come down and help you, Anna.
Oh, are you?
Too.
Okay.
Yeah. But this should just be a short video demonstration of what that process has looked like and why it's imperative that it happens.
That was right, that was right.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Alexis's computer is hard to navigate.
This
What
is
it
a
at?
computer.
Oh,
Go.
right there it is.
You guys agree to sign a landlord tenant agreement, those benefits will become available to you as the resident. So it's a simple form, all she has to do is sign and say, I give them the authority to claim the benefits, credit card.
Volume, please.
Let's see if I can get that.
So that's why we created that, because we want to pass these benefits on to tenants.
This is-
Do you, are you
So,
spot? There's home skill exemption, you can qualify for the other under. She'll follow up.
Well, now that could be in her name, water bill.
The water bill, but she could get it in your name by signing that tenant agreement.
Oh, I see.
That's what I'm saying. So all the benefits that are available to the home.
But see, I don't, live here too,
Oh, okay.
so that's why she would have to, and,
Yeah, if she's over 65, she's a
Yeah.
homeowner, she's automatically qualified for homestead exemption. That is a major discount on the water bill. And then not only just water bill, there's all kind of other benefits that are sort of tax benefits. That, she can get a homestead exemption on her taxes and pay a lower tax rate. So, once you get 65, you try to take care of it.
yeah.
So there's a lot of benefits out there, so
I'm sorry it's hard to hear, but got just a few more. I think this is the one.
there's your water coming into your service, right? This is a good shut off valve, that's a bad shut off valve, it's gonna not work here pretty quick. But don't worry about it. All I did was access the pipe that came out of the wall and I scratched it with a pin. All I did to expose the metal. And then what I did is take a magnet and I stick a magnet on it. Magnet does not stick to lead. It will stick to steel.
right.
So you gotta stick there, no stick there. And not only that, when I scratch it and it becomes shiny like a nipple, then you know that's it.
Oh,
So I'm 100% sure this is a lead service coming in. They coupled it right here and they changed the steel here. And it looks like they got copper coming out, so you're fine there.
Yeah.
We just need to drop this, replace this pipe all the way out to the city's water main. So
okay.
you're gonna get a brand new service line. Normally, you hire somebody to do that, you're probably gonna be paying $4,000 or $5,000 for it. So this is a free service to you.
I think this might be the last one.
This is the part that, once it comes through the wall, that's what goes out to the street. Now, what we're looking for is what this material is that comes in from the street, because if that's lead, I wanna come back and replace that for you for free. Now, when you get on this side of the meter, that's all your internal plumbing, and it looks like it's copper, so I think you're fine. This is what I'm gonna try to test to see what we have here.
Okay.
Now, I'm just gonna do a real simple test. It's a scratch test and it's a magnet test. That, if it sticks, we know it's steel, all right? It sticks, it's steel. My test is over. So you're fine right now. You do not have lead coming into your house. So that's essentially what it, if that didn't stick, then I would go to a scratch test to see what, if it's either copper or lead. Magnet is not gonna stick to either copper or lead. Copper is good, lead is bad, steel is still okay, but at some point soon, it's gonna be running out of useful life. But right now, you're fine, you don't need to do anything, but we do need to get you a different meter in here.
Okay.
This is that,
So we get the gist. Oh, yeah, you got the rest, cool.
Thank you for that commercial break. But I think it was important for you all to see that so that you see what that process actually looks like in real time. Those folks let us into their home, but because they saw a friendly face, because we did the necessary work with the community-based organization, or I should say the public utility, did the necessary work with the community-based organization to gain that trust to build those relationships. And our previous director, Ed Moore, who you saw talking there, he's not there anymore, he retired. So that process of rebuilding that relationship with a whole new director starts over, right? Because they all are engineering minds, they may not have that cultural competency, they may not have that community understanding. And so they have to learn it, right? And we've taken on the responsibility to say, we'll meet you here and we'll make your process and your job easier, but you have to be willing to come to the table and have those conversations. To be willing to understand that community wants to protect their family. Nobody wants to poison their children. Nobody wants to live without water, you know, so we have to understand circumstances and there's nuance to this. So I'm gonna leave it there. I know we're gonna have questions, but thank you all.
Describe to people who are online what the video.
Yes, absolutely. So those who are online, if you missed it, those videos were examples of real time. I was the one videotaping, so that's why it's on the small phone screen. Of us going inside folks' home with their consent to test their inside fixtures on whether or not they had lead, any source of lead anywhere throughout that line. And if they did, the city replaced it for them on the public and private side to, you know, mitigate exposure and not do partials. And if they didn't, then, you know, he gave information about how they can go about getting access to other water programs in Toledo. So hopefully that's a good, excellent. So thank you, and I'll turn it back to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Alexis. Okay, so now we're gonna enter the questioning part. Brett talked about funding. Alexis talked about community organizations working with the neighborhood, and Jill talked about outreach. So if you have any questions, and I can talk about Chicago, yeah, which is really interesting. You guys can pose questions. Any questions out there? Yes, ma'am.
Sources of money for the funding. I mean, to hear a lot of people say to that homeowner, yeah, you got a problem. And it's free for us to fix it. Where is that money coming from?
Could you repeat the question too when you answer?
Okay, so the question, as I understood it, was when somebody is going to the door and saying it's free for you, where is that money coming from?
Right.
So you have a couple different options depending on what state you're in. Right now, there's an exciting opportunity, so long as the funding is still available, to access funds from the bipartisan infrastructure law. And that's what I was talking about earlier, where if you can demonstrate need, that's usually how the states are managing it. So you populate your inventory, you're able to show that you have these lead pipes. The states then award the city money to get those pipes replaced. And there's several more rounds of that to go. So for the next couple of years, that's still going to be an option. There's also the American Rescue Plan, which unfortunately all those funds had to be obligated by December 31st of last year. So going forward, that's not an option, but up until a couple months ago, that was another way that a lot of cities were addressing the funds. You know, in New York State, you have the Clean Water Infrastructure Act and a couple other small state sources to do, if not lead service line replacement, although that is an option. Other things that are going to support or mitigate lead service line replacement. So for instance, in Troy, one of our biggest problems was that our corrosion control system is failing. And so, you know, there are pots of money at the state level that can address aspects of your lead service line prices, if not the replacements. And then finally, it can also be ratepayer funded, although that is a legally sort of dicey question in some states and not in others.
Thank you. Well, the one thing I would add is what most of them do, which is bond. So they bond, they have the ability to bond out for 30 years usually. That is still ratepayer funded in the end mostly. But we hear a lot, so I'm gonna cross over topics here a little bit, but we hear a lot about utilities where they can't. They have a lot of issues with maintenance, including lead lines usually. And then they don't wanna raise rates, because usually that goes through somebody who's elected, who is afraid of raising rates. So then what happens, especially in places like Pennsylvania right now, is a company comes in, swoops in with a great big offer to buy the utility and run it. And then rates go up precipitously, really, 200 times what they were often. And people are afraid of bonding, but bonding is way cheaper than privatizing. Because you can pay that back over 30 years. If you can find other funds during that period, you can pay some of that off without raising rates. So there are different ways of cities coming to look at how are we gonna deal with these lead lines? Because even if the lead and copper rule improvements get taken back, which they may, there's still a need to move this forward. And so we're gonna have to have those, it's an excellent question, because we're gonna have to have those ideas about what if ARPA isn't there? What if state revolving funds are too small to get this done? We have to come up with those other options, and that's one of the ones that's usually used, is bonding.
We have another question. Yes, ma'am, and I'll get you.
So, we know we have a problem in Syracuse, and before we can even get to funding it or fixing it, we have to get our administration to even accept there's a problem. So, as you said, we call them trusted messengers in our community, folks like myself knock on the door. We're putting the word out there, but just as fast as we put the word out there, we have the administration spinning that we're basically crazy, we don't know what we're talking about. Our health department is supporting this, even though they don't test water as part of their lead investigation when a child comes up positive, so how can they say water is not the issue? How do you guys, we have to get them on board in order to.
I'll start. I
If you could
want to make sure you're way up in this corner.
Can you repeat the question?
Question.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'll repeat the question.
Thank you.
So when you're in a city and there is a problem, and in Syracuse, there is a problem and it's documented, but your town officials may not admit that there's a problem. What do? How do you overcome that? And how do your trusted messengers help with that? So first of all, I want to connect you because you're way up here in this corner, and Robert Pinckney, raise your hand. Robert has dealt with that exact issue. So that's how it started in Benton Harbor. In Benton Harbor, the mayor said, there is no lead problem, even though it was very publicly and scientifically clear there was a problem. So I would encourage you to talk to Reverend Pinckney, but one of the things is you have to bring in a higher authority. And so what had to happen in Benton Harbor was a whole bunch of groups got together and petitioned EPA to say, you've got to come in and deal with this and make the state stop negotiating with the city, because you're just negotiating details. We need something to happen, because it had been 3 years since they were out of compliance. So that's a couple of ideas there, but it's a tough problem because the folks on the ground like you, also, that's pretty risky stuff. So I commend you. Thank you for that work.
Yeah, no, I think you covered what I was gonna mention in terms of, having to go the next sort of level up to try to get that accountability. From a community perspective, there's a lot of things that we are at risk for, right? Because Junction Coalition, which is in Junction neighborhood, is a 501c3, so we can't you know, there's certain things in terms of politics you can't get involved in at all, right? You don't want to endorse anybody, that sort of thing. But, you know, I found what has happened, what has been useful for us is to leverage the partnerships with Freshwater Future, getting LTEs out, and utilizing the news media to tell the community story, and say, you know, this, in fact, actually, I'll tell you a story in Toledo. They weren't always like very progressive and like really willing to do this work. It was us exposing it to the grand public, not just the neighborhood that's impacted, but to the entire city. And so we held a press conference with one of the women in our neighborhood who sat there and ran the water in her sink, brought it to the community meeting and was like, this is my water and it's brown. And we had invited our council person there. We had invited a lot of different of our political officials, and a lot of them didn't show up, but our council person showed up. And so seeing that come out of their water and videotaping that and documenting it and putting it out there to the public and in the media puts on the pressure, especially if you're in an election year, just saying, you know, and so I will say public opinion does help in making sure that you have other champions, not just the folks in your neighborhood, also seeing the truth of the matter, I think helps to turn the conversation.
Yeah, I think both speakers covered a lot of what I would say about this, but one thing that we've had a lot of success with is making the sort of willful ignorance that got the problem to where it is now in Troy much more embarrassing to continue than not. And part of that was our coalition sort of like bad news bears kind of mentality and character in the media, and driving that narrative of like, we're a very improvisational group of dopes who are right about this issue. And like, if we're the dopes, what are you then to like not get it? And having a little bit of humility and character and fun around that, like that energy, did a lot of the work where the media wanted to cover our story, and it became totally untenable for the city to pretend that this wasn't happening. So yeah, I think having a little bit of control of the narrative and driving it in that way, not necessarily being like the smartest person in the room, or like not making that your priority when you're communicating, can go a really long way, and making it just really punishing for a city to just pretend that this isn't happening.
Thank you. I'm gonna get to her first in the back of the room, and then I'll get to you, sir. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Alexis, about your challenges with like trying to reach all of the community, even on a grass level, like, let's say there's somebody that is hearing impaired. There might be people of color that speak another language, like those types of things, so, cause it's on TV or on social media, whatever, they may not, there might be that barrier or whatever, so what kind of challenges have you had with reaching the whole community on the grassroots level?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Danan. So the question was, what are some of the challenges that we faced in our doing the outreach with so many different folks that we're trying to service? And I'm glad you brought that up, because another challenge that we do have in our neighborhood is that digital divide. We have a large population of elders, and they aren't on social media. They aren't using computers and you know, the city's website to get their information. They're still relying on newsprint. They're relying on, you know, TV ads, billboards, that sort of thing. And so recognizing that, we utilized all those different the forms of media. We couldn't just put it on our social media account. We couldn't just you know, try to put it on a billboard. And a lot of times those sort of things are expensive, which is great to have Freshwater Future, you know, provide funding to help do those sort of things. But we also realized the tried and true method of door knocking still works and still is the most effective in our neighborhood. And so I think it's knowing your neighborhood and what the demographic is, the way that they are most likely to respond and be open. Phone calls is still a tried and true method for us. So we have an entire phone bank. And we create those phone banks and start to collect that information through our community, meetings. And those community meetings the same way. We went door knocking to almost every house that we could find, every person willing to listen, to say, come to this meeting. We know you don't care about lead right now. After we get done with you, you will. But we also realize that you have a need, you have other needs, right? You're working third shift, you're working all day, your kids, you're not sure where your next meal is gonna come from. So Junction Coalition doesn't just deal with environmental issues, we're a full service neighborhood organization where we're connecting our residents to resources. So they might come in having an issue with, their roof. They need a new roof and can't afford it, and so they'll come to the meeting so they can complain to us, and then we can go complain to the city. But then at the end of that, we have an opportunity, we have their attention. Not only do we have their name and their number that we collected at the door when they registered, so that we can follow up, but now we can tell them about lead. We can tell them about these other risks, environmental risks to their health and to their families. And so it's that, I think the old school, traditional, but still very much the most effective in-person engagement that has helped us be the most effective. But the challenges of the digital divide and needing to be flexible and needing to have an overarching broad way to communicate with community is something that we're still learning and still improving on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Were there any government officials that eventually came on board to be strong, positive advocates for change, and how did that all happen?
Absolutely. So the question was, were there any public officials that eventually came around to do the right thing? Absolutely. We, with one of our public officials, actually started a water task force in response to all of the things that, we were putting out into the media, that we were talking about, showing up to council meetings and being loud about. And so we had a number of allies, which is a great thing to uplift, because I know a lot of times we get into these meetings and these community settings, and the one thing we want to do is beat up on city officials, which deserving or not, right? But I think it's important to also leverage those good partners that we are able to find, those good advocates and water advocates who are wanting to do the right thing, get behind them, appreciate them, thank them publicly for being a part of that fight.
We got one more question. So Liam, you want to make a question? And then we'll end up there because we have to take a break at 10:40. And then we'll be reconvening back here at 11 o'clock. And then you can also reach out to us during the break. So go ahead.
Yeah, so speaking on, I think I'm on the other side of the digital divide in that I'm kind of new to the advocacy thing, and my project has been working with people owning private wells in the Adirondacks, but being a student, I can't really be in person doing things there. And so what I have to do most times is phone calls. Sometimes that's a little unreliable with people, even not even trusting my phone calls. Like, especially the old folks, they'll literally say, I'd like to send you a free water test for your well. It's like, I'm not interested. No. It's a little frustrating. And also, I have to figure out which community centers, and oftentimes these really small towns, where do I send a package of water tests for them to distribute on behalf. So I guess what I'm saying is what would you recommend?
Yeah, so I'm gonna try to reiterate the question best I can. So on the other side of maybe the only access you have is through phone calling, and that's not really reliable. And you don't have the ability to go door knocking. How do you still do the outreach and get folks the information they need? Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I would say let's talk after this because that might take a little bit more strategy and a little bit understanding the landscape of the community that you work in. I think I don't know if you've identified or know of any community-based organizations or trusted folks in those communities. Because word of mouth, I think, also works wonders. At least if you can get one, you can tell them, okay, I want you to take this message and now go tell your neighbor and go knock on their door if you have to, because it's that important. And so I think even with the ones that you're able to reach, maybe building a network for them to sort of, and leverage them to have a little bit more reliable, outreach. So if I can get Reverend Pinckney or Greg to answer my phone call, I know they have family members and folks who might live near them that they can go and get in contact with. So building that network and then also realizing that the community-based organization is just that, it's community-based. So use the community as well, empower them and deputize, as Mama Monica would say, them into doing this work as well, so.
I would just add that in a place like the Adirondacks, I wouldn't limit yourself to NGOs. I would talk to businesses. In a place like the Adirondacks, my perception is, just as a tourist there, businesses are key vital sources of information and all sorts of things in communities like that. And so if you can work with a local gas station that also has a restaurant and, there are places like that where people go to get everything. And if they will help you get that word out because they can see the importance of it. So it's finding those, as Alexis was saying, any local trusted entity.
We have to end at this particular point, because it's on a huge time schedule. If you have any more questions, please bring it up to us during the break. I would like to thank the panelists. I would like to thank you guys, and we'll see you back at 11 o'clock.